So, everyone can hear me. That really came in. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you with us this morning, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Stop Climate Chaos Scotland and the Scottish Government to this event. Today we'll be talking about the Glasgow Climate Dialogues, which was an initiative that we have run together as the Government and Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, really trying to reach out around the world to hear the voices of experts from the Global South and then to project them here into COP. So you won't hear much from me today, but I'm delighted to have the panel we have with us. I'll introduce them one by one, but I am delighted to have Minister Mary McCallum with us this morning. Thank you for making the time and being with us. Obviously, we know Scotland isn't a conference of the parties, so isn't a signature to the UNFCCC, but I do want to mark and welcome the announcement yesterday where the Scottish Government was the first government to put up money for loss and damage, which I think is hugely significant. And I hope that the signatories to the conference will take inspiration from this and will follow the precedent and commit money to loss and damage as we see the announcements being made. So, the first I'd like to do is to invite Julius Ngoma to speak for us. Julius is a long-term partner of SCIAF, an old friend of ours, but he's also the National Coordinator for Civil Society Network on Climate Change in Malawi, and has been leading the network since 2014 on major strategic areas of policy research and advocacy. Capacity building, information management, network coordination and collaboration. So he clearly brings a wealth and breadth of experience. Julius has been part of the collaboration between Global South colleagues and took part in the Global Climate Dialogues with us. He was one of the co-facilitators, which was quite deliberately half and half with people from Scotland and facilitators from the Global South. So, Julius, if I could just ask you to give us a brief introduction to all the work and the structure that went into the climate dialogues.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair, and good morning to you all. And thank you, the Minister, for being with us here and welcoming us in Glasgow. It's been a long journey, but we made it. So thank you. So, let me just say that we, as civil society in the Global South, and collaborated with the civil society in the Global North, particularly the Stop Climate Chaos colleagues and other civil society in Scotland, to actually come up with a very good initiative, which I actually celebrate until today, which is the Scottish Climate Dialogues, which just to say a few words about it before I actually talk about our experiences, that I'm happy that such an initiative happened where we had representation from the Global South, which is the civil society collaborating with the North, but also the government of Scotland was part of it. And it was a very well-organized event where I think I'm also particularly happy with the process, because the general idea was to make sure that we bring in the voices of the Global South, which are particularly being, they are vulnerable, but also somehow sidelined in most of the COP negotiation processes when it comes to contributing, whether it has to be within the negotiations, but also even the build-up of the events to the different negotiation forums. So I was part of the task force, but also I was privileged to be part of one of the co-facilitators of one of the sessions, which is access, participation, and voice. Although we had 4 other sessions where each of the sessions at least had a representation from as co-facilitator from the Global South, and the Global North, but also we had carefully came up with presenters from the Global South and the Global North, particularly those from the Global South, which were actually requested to make presentations on the different sessions. And beyond that, we also had to make sure that we had the process of making sure we validate the information that came out from the different sessions with participants from the Global South particularly being targeted. So it doesn't mean that we didn't have the Global North representatives, but they were there to also dialogue with the rest of the team from the Global South. So here we are. We have a communique which was actually developed and also presented to the government of Scotland and as a word from us from the session, which clearly highlights the different issues that were raised by the Global South representatives during the 4 sessions. But as I indicated, I was particularly involved mostly in co-organizing a session on access, participation, and voice, which actually resonated so well on most of the issues that we had, particularly the experiences that the Global South have in platforms like the Conference of Parties and even beyond that. So one of the key critical issues that came out clearly was, which also actually I can say it actually speaks better to my experience and the experience of the Global South, was the issue of the barrier on how to actively being represented in the forums like the Conference of Parties. We've noted that over the years. For instance, COP is hosted by different governments and different countries, and for Global South, participants to make it to a conference, it takes a lot of things. It takes hard work because there are so many barriers related to finances. For example, for me to be here, I had to travel for 2 days to be here, but I also had to find some support from colleagues from the Global North to facilitate the travel and even participation to this important event. So that has not happened this year only. It has happened so many years, ever since the time that we started engaging the COP. It has always been an issue. We on the issues to do with participation, we are just in a platform where, or in a world now that we're talking about COVID. COVID has also taught us different lessons in terms of how we want to be engaging moving forward. We've seen introductions of these online platforms, which we have unique challenges as Global South, because internet is a big issue in our country. So you can't expect that for us to be really involved if we have internet issues and we can't even raise our voice. We are counting the cost of having the SBs and substar sessions a few months ago online, where some of us were not even able to get our voices into the platform. And beyond that, we are also looking at the situation where when you come to the Conference of Parties like this, even as a civil society organization or a youth representative, you're not even given space to actually articulate your issues. So whether the voice that we have to bring into the table gets into the conclusions of the COP is something that needs to be looked at. So finally, what we're actually trying to propose is that the UNFCCC should actually learn from these processes, should actually make sure that the representation, participation, and even voice from the Global South has to be heard in the tables. Clear mechanisms have to be put in place to ensure that all these issues are actually dealt with, especially making sure that we have the civil society from the Global South accessing these platforms and even including their voice. So there's a need for an action plan that needs to be developed to ensure that all these issues are actually dealt with utmost agency and also with honesty. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julius. And each of you should have found a copy of the communique that came out of this process on your seats as you sat down. You will see that there are 2 pages of recommendations under the 4 themes we discussed. So access, participation and voice, adaptation, loss and damage, and just transition. And that call for a process and a framework for greater participation and access you will find under that first section on participation. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Margaret Matsudio Eberru. I hope I said that right, Margaret. Oh, I did. Good, good. Margaret is a smallholder farmer from the West Nile region of northern Uganda and is chairperson of the Eastern and Southern African Small-Scale Farmers Forum in Uganda. And Margaret is going to talk to us about what she wants negotiators to listen to, what she wants them to hear from people on the ground at the front line of the climate emergency, and what are the challenges smallholder farmers face and the need for climate finance. Margaret, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. As a small-scale farmer, climate, food, and women. This is a family of 3. When one is affected, it affects the other. So when you cause climate change, it affects women, it affects food. And looking at agricultural sector in Uganda, especially in global north in general, in global south in general, women are the labor, they provide the largest number of labor in agriculture. So when a woman is affected, when a woman is stressed in all whatever she does, you must know that it is a curse on you. Who causes the problem to that woman? We are mothers. When we talk, the family listens too. So when we complain that there is the climate change is affecting us so much, people should listen to it. And action must be taken, because if you don't take action, who will feed the family? Who will feed the nation? Who will feed the world? Yet they produce food. Therefore, as we know, as a woman, when you don't have food on the table, the children are affected, the parents are, the fathers are affected, the vulnerable people are affected, the community is affected. So the long drought, the flood affects the production of food. And look at the COVID period where the women, where food is the most essential thing in administer this COVID-19. You are advised to feed well, to eat healthy. Now, if the climate change is caused, where shall we get food? Therefore, in this COP26, to address the climate crisis, this climate negotiation COP26 should address inequality and climate change. And climate change are intrinsically linked, and so there are solutions. Every year matters. Each decision counts. Every 0.1 degrees is crucial. Peasant agroecology and food sovereignty achieves climate, social and ecological justice. To end this, we demand, as small-scale farmers, make sure that the industrialized agriculture and corporate food system be at the center of COP26 discussion about the pathway to a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. Climate change policies and programs are still far from being implemented. This is due to acknowledged financial limitations. So let's put, resulting into very few farmers being assisted by local government to adapt to the climate change. So we demand that climate effects of climate change should be financed and should be priority. Make small-scale farmers and agroecology part of the solutions to the climate crisis. Yes, look, if it was not because of the civil society organization, who will talk about the small-scale farmers? Our voice will not be heard because nobody bothers about it. But when policies are there, the policies are put at a certain level which the small-scale farmers do not know. When it comes to implementation, whether it is negatively affecting the farmers or positively affecting the farmers, all will rest on the small-scale farmers. Therefore, this COP26 should put small-scale farmers at the center of the discussion so that we are, our voices are heard. Develop global and national framework for allocating adequate and appropriate financial and technical support to small-scale farmers to enable them implement and invest in interventions for adapting to the climate crisis to sustain their livelihood. Yes, we also have align awarding criteria and procedures of financial mechanisms such as green climate finance to small-scale farmers and their farm organizations, like ESAF, Uganda, like African Women's Collaborative for Healthy Food System, because these organizations which deal directly with the farmers, like Oxfam, which has given a lot of support to farmers like me to speak on behalf of the rest of the farmers. And so such fundings, if it is given to such organization, we are sure of getting financed on the effects of climate. Okay. As I conclude, we also demand that invest in agroecological research and must importantly impact areas by climate change and promote family farming-centered resilient agricultural practices. We also actively involve small-scale farmers and make other people working in rural areas develop such green recovery and response plan to COVID-19. Don't leave us behind. Small-scale farmers urge Ugandan climate change negotiation team. Okay, that is all the team in Scotland here, to recognize that peace and agroecology and food sovereignty achieves climate justice with the proven serious solution to climate crisis, critically for climate mitigation and adaptation. So that is what we demand to see in this COP26 negotiation. Thank you so much.
Margaret, thank you. And it's so good to have your voice, and on behalf of so many of the people of the Global South here in the room and speaking so eloquently about what we really need to hear coming out of this COP. That was the whole purpose of the Global Climate Dialogue. So you have achieved it in 1 6-minute slot. So thank you. Now I'd like to invite Danny Shrikaranja. I stumbled as I said it, Danny. I'm sorry. I have to practice. Shrikaranja. I have gone blank. It's a delight to have you with us, Danny. Danny is the Chief Executive of Oxfam GB, and he'll talk about the need to position lived experience and the voices of the Global South and expertise at the very centre of this process. Danny, over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Al. Good morning, everyone. Before I start, I just wanted to say, Minister McCallan, thank you for the leadership you and your government have shown on international development, but particularly on climate finance. The £1 million announced on loss and damage yesterday may seem small compared to the billions that we're talking about in this conference, but for many of us who are deeply concerned about loss and damage, it's the sort of pioneering leadership that you're showing that we appreciate. And I also wanted to say how good it is to be here in Glasgow, and how, for me, this is the start of a second revolution. You know, here's the birthplace or the hometown of James Watt, who kicked off the Industrial Revolution. And we need nothing short of a double revolution when it comes to climate change. The first is rather obvious. It's the revolution around the action that's needed to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions here and across the world. But the second revolution is what I would call perhaps a participation revolution, that the what and the how, the WHAT, and the how are equally important if we as a humanity are going to find our way out of this climate crisis. And these climate dialogues, this session, the points that have been made by Francis and Margaret, for me, are a reminder of how, if we get it wrong on the participation, we will get it wrong on the climate action. And you know, I've spent the last 48 hours wandering the corridors of this blue zone and in the green zone, and I've been around quite a number of UN and multilateral meetings over the years, and I can't help but think that there is some attention being paid to participation, to making sure that the voices of the marginalized, the voices of the young people whose lives are going to be dramatically affected, the voices of species that are being made extinct, there's some attempt to bring those voices in. But every time I hear the word consultation, especially with civil society, I fear that we see little more than insultation, that the voices of the people who matter the most, of the generations who matter the most, are getting heard here more perhaps than they were before, but nowhere near enough to make this the most meaningful participation revolution we need it to be. And for me, I just wanted to share 3 reasons why that participation revolution is so critical to climate action. One, rather obviously, is it's the right thing to do. There is a moral imperative on all of us here in rooms like this to make sure that we're serious about participation. 2, it will almost certainly lead to better solutions, to better actions on climate. And 3rd, it will almost certainly lead to longer lasting, more durable, more sustainable actions and change. And I just wanted to reflect on each of those points. When I hear Francis or Margaret, when I heard yesterday the Fijian leader talking about the boat sinking, despite the fact that we are bailing water out as we go, or the representative of the Seychelles talking about that country gasping for air, I can't help but think that the people who are being most dramatically and directly affected by climate breakdown, who've had the least to do with climate change, just don't have their voice heard in nearly as great a proportion as they need to be. There are lots of statistics flying around this week, and I wanted to share one that I can't get out of my mind, and that's a statistic that Oxfam worked on, which tried to calculate who has been responsible for global greenhouse emissions over the 25 years from 1990 to 2015. The richest 1% of the world's population was responsible for more emissions than the poorest half of the world's population, 3.1 billion people worth of emissions. The richest 10% of the world's population was responsible for half of all emissions over that 25-year period. And I want you to do as I do and look around the halls of this meeting and see how many of us are from that 10% of the world's richest population and how many of us are from the poorest half of the world's population. Those of us who directly and indirectly have caused climate breakdown are here in vast numbers, are dominating the conversation, but the people whose lives are being adversely affected, directly affected, are hardly ever heard, except in dialogues like these or in small spaces like these or the occasional speech by the leader. And I think there is a moral duty on all of us to make sure those people, those generations to come, are represented adequately in these conversations. The second is a rather instrumental reason, that if we want to have any chance of having the sort of best solutions for climate action, we have to get better at participation. Mary Robinson often says that climate change is a man-made problem that needs a feminist solution. And I think she's so right. And for me, a feminist solution has to be an inclusive one. It's one in which recognizes the power that we hold, the privilege that we hold, and shares that power meaningfully. And that is going to be an important part of the action. It's also, I think, if we're going to find the creativity, channel the sort of creativity that humanity will need to have any chance of a sustainable future, then we need to crowd in as many minds as possible. And that also means as much participation, as much diversity of thought, of creativity as is meaningfully possible. And I really fear that we haven't yet got processes that are able to do that. And finally, around long-lasting solutions. I don't know if you've been to the Green Zone, and I did yesterday. I love every bit of green technology I can lay my hands on, that sort of flying electric aircraft or the new Formula E cars. I love all that stuff. But our solutions for climate change are political. It's the sort of leadership we need to come out of this COP. They're technical. That's those sort of inventions and innovations that we need. But equally important is the behavior change that we will need to have any chance of working our way out of this mess. And if we want to maximize our chance of behavior change, then we have to get much better at participation. We have to bring everyone in the world into these conversations, so each and every person feels that they can and will play their part in climate action, in a sustainable solutions. And so whether it's a moral duty on us, whether it's the search for more effective solutions or on more sustainable solutions, I think we have to get much, much better at participation and bring the voices of as many people into these conversations as possible, and nothing short of a participation revolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. A participation revolution. It's the right thing to do. It will bring the best solutions, and they will be the most durable solutions. It couldn't be clearer than that. I'd now like to hand over to Minister Mary McCallum, who is the Scottish Minister for the Environment, Biodiversity and Land Reform. And it's a great pleasure to have you with us today, Mary. And I've seen in the months you've been in post how you've really warmed to the brief and really got to grips with some of the detail of the international development and the work that SCIAF has been doing in Malawi. So it's a pleasure to have you with us on the panel, and it would be great to hear more about how the Scottish Government views particularly participation of the Global South, and thoughts for how the Scottish Government can help us build that participation revolution. Thank you. Please do, help yourself.
I'll use this just to assist me with my heavy government folders that I've got with me. Thank you very much, Alistair, for that introduction. And good morning, everybody. Can I begin by welcoming you to Glasgow, to this vital summit at this crucial moment for the world. My day began yesterday discussing how we deliver a just transition domestically in Scotland. So it is absolutely right that today should begin on the most important matter of climate justice. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today and to share the platform with you all. Julius, Margaret, Danny, Alistair, you're all incredibly inspirational individuals, and it is a great privilege to share this platform with you. I'm very proud to do so. So we know that climate change is the single greatest long-term threat that we are all facing. It is no exaggeration to say that the future of our planet and everything living on it depends on concerted action and action taken now. However, we also know that the effects of climate change are not felt equally, and they are being felt in a much more pronounced way by folks around the world. That's happening now, and it will happen in years to come. It's already the case that our friends and neighbours across the world are already suffering real economic hardship through drought, flooding, desertification, coastal erosion. Margaret spoke to some of those examples already. And indeed, there are many who are suffering in a way that is not economically calculable, including through the loss of life. Climate change is an urgent human rights issue, posing a serious risk to the fundamental rights to life, to health, to food, and to an adequate standard of living for individuals and for communities. And so many of these individuals and communities, as I say, are being affected right now. And as has been discussed by the panel, they have done so little or nothing to cause it. So we believe that the responsibility of tackling the climate crisis must fall on the countries with the greatest responsibilities for the position that we're in and with the greatest respective capacity to make a contribution. So Scotland is rising to that challenge. We are trying to rise to that challenge, and we call on others to do the same. COP26 is our best and perhaps our last chance to keep the ambitions of 1.5 alive. And as for our part, Scotland is absolutely determined to ask ourselves whose voices are not being heard and to elevate the voices of all those people who are far too infrequently heard, be that young people, women, those from the Global South. We want to build bridges, to come together, to share important views on key issues around the themes of participation, adaptation, loss and damage, and a fair and just transition. And I would like to see the recommendations that have been discussed today and which are in the copy of the communique that you all have influence governments throughout this conference and beyond. And I'll certainly be doing my part to share that copy of the communique with people that I meet over the next couple of weeks. The Glasgow Dialogues and the Malawi Climate Leaders event will allow for the lived experience of loss and damage to be brought to the fore. And our support for the We Do will help grassroots and Indigenous women leaders to invest in and to scale up the climate solutions that they need in their communities, designed by them. We have, and it's been said already, a moral responsibility to acknowledge the urgency and the urgent need for action on loss and damage. And in Scotland, we're already trying to play our part. We, in 2012, launched our Climate Justice Fund, and we have just committed to double it over the course of this Parliament. And yesterday, as I think Alistair mentioned, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced that we would enter a partnership with the Climate Justice Resilience Fund to support resilience and to address loss and damage, supported by £1 million of Scottish Government funding. We are proud to do so. We want to show solidarity with those most impacted, and we will do that through our climate justice work. I had the opportunity to speak at the communique launch event in September, and I spoke about how developed countries have that moral responsibility to fund global action. And I just want to take this opportunity to make clear that this COP26 must deliver on the $100 billion commitment set by the UNFCCC many years ago now. It's absolutely essential that that is now delivered. Just to speak very briefly about what Scotland is trying to do domestically to tackle the twin crises of climate change and nature loss, we've already legislated to achieve net zero emissions by 2045, with a commitment to reach 75% reduction by 2030. And crucially, our laws are underpinned by a commitment to just transition, which means that we will approach this in a way that is fair and which leaves no one and no community behind. So we're rightly proud of what we've achieved, but we are crystal clear that there is so much work still to do. And we're looking forward, including to COP27 in South Africa, which may seem premature on day 2 of COP26, but this is a continuous effort. This is not a snapshot of 2 weeks and then we forget about this. We must continue to plan. As nations, we must work hard and we must work together. That's why we want to use our role as co-chairs of the Under 2 Coalition to champion increased climate ambition from now until COP27. The Under 2 Coalition now represents 1.75 billion people around the world, and we believe that countries, cities, states that are not parties to the conference have a huge role to play in being a bridge between the conference negotiators and the state parties and our countries, our cities, our nations, to elevate the voices of young people and to elevate the voices of those for the Global South. So I won't go on too much longer. I just want to end where I began by stating that climate change is the single greatest threat that we face. We must all play our part in addressing it through our ambitious action at home and, crucially, through our ambitious action overseas. Our efforts must be collaborative, they must be inclusive, they must ask ourselves at all times who are we not hearing from and elevate their voices, and we cannot fail. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mary. And it's very welcome to hear the Scottish Government's commitment to see that announcement yesterday, which, as I said at the beginning, I really hope will set a precedent that others follow and we start to see some real movement on loss and damage. And also to recognise that we in Scotland, while we have those ambitious targets, don't always meet our own standards. And we need to double down ourselves here so that we make sure that we continue to lead the way in showing that a net zero world can be done and can be done fast enough to make 1.5 degrees a reality. So I'm pleased to say I'm doing my job rather well. So we now have some extra time and we can take questions if anyone would like to ask any. I'm going to surprise the panelists with that because we weren't sure we'd have the opportunity. But does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask about this? And if I could take the gentleman at the back there, then Father Leonard, and then yourself, please. So.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this discussion. My name is Daniel Torres Bolaro. I'm from Swarthmore College, and that's located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But I'm originally from American Samoa, which is a U.S. territory located in the South Pacific, which in fact is actually not even represented in these delegations. Danny, you talked a lot about like this moral imperative to include marginalized voices, which includes people from the global South and also the generations who will inherit like the future, right? I think a big issue in these conferences that is a barrier to participation is oftentimes, in order to participate effectively, you need the formal and technical, and I would even argue, Western-centric knowledge to even participate in these spaces. And so if we're gonna include people, I think we need to think about like, I guess my question is, how do we not just include the voices of those most marginalized, but actually center them and to actually be more decisive in these like spaces? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Leonard?
So good morning, everyone. My name is Leonard Chiti. I'm a Jesuit priest from Zambia, and I have the privilege of visiting most of Southern Africa, where I see evidence of what climate change has done to communities on the front line. My question is directed to the Minister, and let me begin by thanking the Scottish Government for providing leadership in the whole climate change business, but also for this important announcement of providing finance for loss and damage. And my question then is on this announcement on the money that has been pledged for loss and damage, and I want to put it in a wider context of climate finance. How do I ensure that this money gets to communities that Margaret represents? And as you answer that question, could you say something about the climate finance, the $100 billion that was pledged many years ago, which pledge has not been fulfilled? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leonard. And then if we could take the third question from the gentleman behind you, Anne. Thanks. Thanks, Anne.
My name is David Bowman, journalist at the Herald. It's a Scottish-based newspaper. Just following on from the loss and damage, for the Minister and for Danny, I'm just wondering, why is Scotland being the first sort of nation to pledge this funding? Is there an issue with other governments about sort of taking responsibility for some of that damage, and what needs to happen for others to follow suit, essentially?
Great. Thank you very much, David. So perhaps if I could ask Julius and Margaret, what are your thoughts about how to put your voices really at the centre of the process? What would you like to see come out of the work of the UNFCCC if it was improving things for next time? And then maybe we'll go to the Minister to hear about how to get the money where it's needed, and then the thoughts about the 100 billion. Sorry, was it the 100 billion? Loss and damage, sorry. And Danny, the same to you. So, Julius, have my mic.
Yeah, thank you. I want to agree with the gentleman, the first, who actually asked the question. Sorry, I forgot the name, but I wanted to agree with you and agree with you more for your view, because I think it's not also about let's bring these people here. Let's have a process where we want to engage. And as we called in this called upon the governments, let's say the UNFCCC, to set up a framework, we're actually going a framework or an action plan on how stakeholders from the Global South can be involved. We want to even ask further to go beyond that to ensure that the process really gets what needs to be, going to these processes. It's actually terrestrial kind of discussions and forums where even the civil society from Malawi, would not understand some of the processes. We still need that technical capability to actually engage and also input effectively in this process. So we need that technical capacity. I don't know how the UNFCCC needs to do this, but we need to simplify some of the processes within the UNFCCC, but even simplify further the messages that and the procedures that needs to happen, so that at least that voice has to be heard. Yeah, thank you. So.
Thank you, Julius. And Margaret, very briefly, what are your thoughts about how the voices of the South could be placed at the centre of the process?
Anything without us is not for us. So we want to be part of the discussion. Yeah. 2, the funds given. I want to thank the Scottish government for the pledge. This money should be directed to farmers' organizations or organizations which supports farmers, so that we are sure of benefiting from the funds and we adapt to the climate change. But we are addressing the symptoms. We are not looking at the root cause. We should also address the root cause of the climate change by ensuring that we look at the reduction of the global warming. Who is causing it? Why? Let us reduce on that. Thank you so much. However, remember to eat healthy and live healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you. And Minister, if I could just turn to you very briefly. Thank
Absolutely. Alistair, thank you. I'm almost reluctant to answer, because my answer to the question of how to make sure it's delivered well is to listen to the voices of the people who were seeking to engage in it. So having heard from Julius and Margaret, I think that anything that they can say is far more valuable than me. But for my part and for the Scottish Government's part, we will try and embed democracy at the heart of what we do with the funds. We've done that so far with the funding that we've provided. We will speak directly to the grassroots, to the people who the funding is there to support. We will ask them what suits them best, and we will empower them collectively, ourselves and with partners in SCIAF and Stop Climate Chaos, to have those solutions designed and implemented where they're needed. Just on the $100 billion pledge, I think you asked that question as well. Yes, it needs to be delivered. It needs to be delivered now, and it needs to be done in a way which doesn't saddle countries and communities with debt. And just finally, on the journalist's point about why is Scotland doing this now, we are absolutely dedicated to embedding fairness in what we do in our climate action domestically and around the world. And Scotland takes its role as a cooperative and helpful global neighbour very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. And Danny, last word.
Yeah, just on loss and damage, I think there's been an evolution in these climate negotiations from where the political and the technical have, in some ways, rather obviously taken centre stage. And I think the opportunity at this COP is to put the justice dimension, the loss and damage dimension, the climate finance dimension, right at the heart of the COP agenda. So even if we don't get substantial progress at this COP, what's really important is that loss and damage is secured as a regular and central agenda item for subsequent COPs, because that justice dimension, as we've heard all morning, is intrinsically linked to climate action. And so climate action without climate justice, I think, is morally and technically bankrupt. And Daniel, to your point around participation, I think one thing I've learned is that many of the things we assume to be given are themselves relatively recently. You know, we assume that multilateral or intergovernmental processes need to be like this, with cordons and security barriers and highly technical debates inside. We've got a blue zone and a green zone, but the people zone, with 7 billion of us outside, we assume are out, you know, somewhere over there. We should challenge those assumptions that if we're going to have a sort of participation revolution, we need to reinvent how participation works in global dialogues like this. And I think there is an opportunity in you know, climate discussions have in some ways led the way in truly multi-stakeholder discussions. And I think there is an opportunity to be creative and bold there.
Great. Thank you, Danny. I'd like to ask you all just to thank the 4 speakers. It's been a great pleasure to have you all with us. Before I do, though, participation is crucially important. It's a question of dignity, it's a question of justice, and it's the right thing to do, as Danny said up front. Also, we have to keep 1.5 degrees alive, and we have to stay below 1.5 degrees. And it's only when you hear the voices of those who are suffering most that you really understand how important it is. So it's a question of solidarity. We're either in solidarity with our colleagues from the Global South, or we will continue to abuse our power. And in terms of adaptation, mitigation, more adaptation and loss and damage, as Danny said, we will only do the right things if we let them do the right things. They know what the right solutions are. We can't presume to know any more. So it is a question of participation in order to make sure that the money does go to the right place. It does do the right things, and it produces good results that are sustainable for the long term. As I close, I'm just going to ask for your help. Please, this is the communique from the Global Climate Dialogues. Please take it, disseminate it, take multiple copies. I would love every national delegation to at least have seen this, because it contains recommendations from the Global South of what they would like to be agreed this fortnight. So please hand them out, get them as far as wide as you can. And if we could just finish by showing our appreciation for the 4 great speakers we've had this morning.